They had called her a ghost, a civilian anomaly in the heart of their war machine. They had laughed at her quiet obsession with the mountain's deep pulse. By the time they understood that the mountain had a voice and she was its only interpreter, it was too late to be sorry and just in time to be saved. This is the story of how a woman they dismissed as a rock collector broke a siege not with a weapon, but with the foundation of the world itself. The air inside Forward Operating Base Chimera was a recycled ghost, thin and tasting of ozone and filtered dust. It was an atmosphere engineered for survival, not comfort, a fact Dr. Aris Thorne had assimilated into her own physiology over 73 days of subterranean existence. The base was a dagger of advanced technology plunged into the heart of the Argus mountain range, a silent sentinel buried 3,000 feet beneath a crown of granite and ice. Its purpose was singular: to listen. It was a grand ear pressed against the earth, tuned to the whispers of enemy movements, seismic tremors, and the faint electronic chatter that bled through leagues of hostile territory. For Aris, the base itself was the instrument, and she was its sole, dedicated tuner, a role few understood and even fewer respected. Her lab, a small sterile alcove off the main command artery, was a cocoon of humming servers and glowing screens that displayed the mountain's lifeblood in cascading lines of data. She sat before her primary console, her posture a study in stillness. Her focus was absolute, narrowed to a single thread of inquiry that had consumed her for the past week. On the main display, a topographic hologram of the Argus Range shimmered, a skeletal lattice of light. Deep within it, colored veins represented the different geological strata she had meticulously mapped. Her fingers moved with economical grace across a secondary touch interface, isolating a specific data stream. It was a low-frequency resonance, a thrumming so deep it was less a sound and more a vibration that registered on her most sensitive geophones. It was anomalous, a rhythmic pulse where there should have been only the chaotic signature of tectonic stress. The pulse was faint, a ghost in the machine, but it was structured. It spoke of intent. Her world was one of patterns, and this pattern was a discordant note in the symphony of the earth, a whisper that promised violence. The silence in her lab was a physical presence, a dense medium broken only by the whir of cooling fans. She felt the base around her not as a structure of steel and concrete, but as a node in a much larger system. She felt the immense, crushing weight of the rock above, the patient, ancient pressure of strata laid down over millennia. She knew this mountain intimately, not as a landmark or an obstacle, but as a complex organism. She knew the brittle schists of the upper layers, the dense, crystalline heart of quartz and feldspar at its core, and the treacherous faults that ran through it like flaws in a diamond. She had spent months feeding this knowledge into the base's core systems, creating a geological model so precise it was practically a living entity. The soldiers saw a fortress. She saw a resonant chamber, a massive, imperfect amplifier, and something was beginning to play it. A sharp, metallic clang echoed from the corridor, followed by the percussive stamp of magnetic boots on the grated floor. The sound was an intrusion, a violation of the deep quiet she cultivated. She did not flinch, her eyes remaining fixed on the fluctuating sine wave that represented the anomaly. The energy signature was weak but stable, a repeating cycle of 1.2 hertz. It was artificial. It was a heartbeat. The footsteps stopped at the threshold of her lab. She felt a presence fill the doorway, a block of heat and impatience that disturbed the carefully balanced air. "Dr. Thorne." The voice was a blunt instrument. It belonged to Major Kalen Vance, the commander of FOB Chimera. It was a voice accustomed to instant obedience, a voice that brooked no argument and suffered no nuance. It was the sound of certainty, a brittle and aggressive thing. Eris did not turn. She traced a finger along the wave's crest on her screen. "Major." Her own voice was low, a stark contrast to his, the sound of gravel smoothed by a slow river. Vance stepped into the lab, his large frame seeming to shrink the already cramped space. He was a man built for a different kind of war, a war of shattered landscapes and overt assaults. His uniform was immaculate, his jaw set in a permanent state of belligerent resolve. He radiated a restless energy that chafed against the lab's monastic calm. He surveyed her arrays of screens, his expression a mixture of contempt and bewilderment. To him, her work was academic nonsense, a budgetary black hole that provided no tangible benefit to his mission. He saw squiggly lines on a screen. She saw the enemy sharpening a knife in the dark. "I am conducting my final readiness review for the week," he announced, his tone leaving no doubt that this was not a conversation, but a declaration. "Every department head has submitted their report, except you." He paused, letting the accusation hang in the air. "I need your status update for the command log. Now." Eris finally swiveled her chair to face him, her movements fluid and deliberate. She looked at him, her gaze clear and analytical. Her eyes, the color of slate, seemed to absorb the light. She was unassuming in her simple gray jumpsuit, a stark contrast to his decorated uniform. There was no insignia on her collar, no mark of rank, a fact that visibly irritated him. In his rigidly hierarchical world, she was an unclassifiable object, and therefore a problem. "My work is continuous," she stated. "A weekly report is an arbitrary snapshot of an ongoing diagnostic. The data streams directly to the central server. You have it already." Vance's jaw tightened. He despised her clinical detachment, her refusal to engage in the simple rituals of military courtesy. It felt like a personal affront. "I am not a data analyst, doctor. I am a soldier. I require a summary, in plain language. What is the status of your rock collection?" The sneer was practiced, a weapon he had used on her before. It was designed to diminish her, to put her in her place. The insult glanced off her, as if she were shielded by a field of pure indifference. She turned back to her console and magnified the 1.2 Hz signal. "There is a structured, low-frequency seismic anomaly originating from grid coordinate 7 Delta. Its propagation pattern is inconsistent with natural geologic activity. The source is deep, approximately 4,000 meters, and it is moving." He stared at the screen, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Moving? What is moving? A tectonic plate?" "No, Major," she replied, her voice patient, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. "The movement is directional. It is closing on our position at a rate of 50 meters per hour. The energy signature, while low, is highly coherent. It is not natural." She pointed to a smaller window displaying spectrographic analysis. "And it is modulating. It is carrying information." Vance crossed his arms, his skepticism a palpable force. "Information? You're telling me the mountain is talking to you?" He laughed, a short, harsh bark devoid of humor. "This is exactly the kind of esoteric nonsense I'm talking about. We are a military installation, Doctor, not a New Age retreat. We deal in actionable intelligence, Troop movements, radio intercepts, heat signatures, not geological ghost stories. Geology is the foundation of this theater of operations, Aris said, her tone unchanging. Your actionable intelligence relies on systems buried in that geology, our deep ground fiber network, our seismic intrusion sensors, the resonance pylons for the Jericho defense grid. They all function within the medium I study. If that medium is compromised, so are you. The public confrontation he had perhaps intended to be a simple dressing down in the privacy of her lab escalated later that day. He chose the mess hall during the peak of the evening meal rotation. The large, cavernous space was filled with the low murmur of conversation and the clatter of utensils. Aris sat alone at a small table in the corner, a data slate propped against a water bottle, her attention focused on the numbers scrolling across its surface. She was tracing the progress of the anomaly. It had not deviated from its course. It was now less than 2 kilometers from the base perimeter. Major Vance entered the mess hall with 2 of his junior officers, his presence immediately silencing the conversations nearest the door. He moved with the proprietary air of a man surveying his domain. His eyes scanned the room and locked onto Aris. He walked directly to her table, his boots echoing on the metal floor. The entire room fell silent, the tension ratcheting up with every step he took. He stopped before her, planting his hands on his hips. "Dr. Thorne," he boomed, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Still reading your fairy tales?" Aris slowly looked up from her slate, her expression unreadable. She did not seem surprised or intimidated. She simply observed him, a scientist studying a particularly loud and predictable specimen. "I am monitoring a developing threat, Major." "A threat," Vance scoffed, playing to his audience of soldiers. "You mean the scary vibrations? I've read your preliminary flag in the system. Anomalous seismic activity. You know what I call that? A rock slide waiting to happen. This is the Argus range, Doctor. The ground moves. That's what it does." He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial growl that was still loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I don't know who you are. I don't know what strings you pulled to get this cushy research gig on a frontline installation. But let me be perfectly clear. Your work is a distraction. Your presence is a liability." He straightened up, his voice returning to its full, authoritative volume. "You are a civilian. You are a guest here, a guest who is consuming valuable resources. You have no rank, no authority, and your geological fantasies are irrelevant to the defense of this facility. From now on, you will file your reports through proper channels, and you will cease sending unsubstantiated threat alerts to the command system. Is that understood?" The silence in the mess hall was absolute. Every soldier was watching, waiting for her response. They saw a civilian, a woman being dressed down by their unassailable commander. They saw a power dynamic they understood. Aris considered his words not as an attack, but as a data point. He was operating from a position of ignorance and ego. His worldview was a closed system, incapable of processing new information that contradicted its core tenets. Her response, when it came, was not defensive. It was a simple statement of fact. "The anomaly is not a fantasy, Major. It is a vector, and it will arrive at the outer sensor perimeter in approximately 34 hours. You can ignore my data, but you will not be able to ignore the consequences." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then her eyes dropped back to her data slate, a clear and unequivocal dismissal. A low murmur rippled through the room. Vance's face flushed with a dark, furious red. He had expected submission, perhaps a flustered apology. He had received calm, clinical defiance. He had tried to humiliate her, and had, in some indefinable way, been diminished himself. He stood there for a second, his fists clenched, a man robbed of the climax of his own power play. Then, with a choked sound of disgust, he spun on his heel and stalked out of the mess hall, his officers trailing in his wake like pilot fish. Eris Thorne did not watch him go. She was already tracking the next fluctuation in the signal, her mind moving far beyond the petty drama of the room, focused entirely on the approaching silent storm. The crisis arrived 34 hours and 12 minutes later, not with a bang, but with a sudden, terrifying silence. Eris was in her lab, her body wired with a tension that had been building for days. She had watched the signal grow stronger, more complex, as it neared the base. It was no longer a simple heartbeat. It was now a chattering, intricate language of vibrations, a code being written into the very rock upon which they stood. On her main screen, a red proximity circle pulsed around the icon of FOB Chimera. The source of the anomaly had reached the deep ground sensor net. Then it happened. The first system to fail was the Jericho defense grid. Its status light on the command center's main board, visible even from her alcove, flicked from green to amber, then to a stark blood red. A low, continuous alarm began to sound, a mournful tone that spoke of catastrophic failure. Seconds later, the deep ground communications array went dead. The constant, low-level hiss of interstellar background noise that was the comm's lifeblood vanished, replaced by a profound and unnerving quiet. The secure data links to high command, the encrypted channels that were their only connection to the outside world, were severed. They were deaf. Major Vance's voice erupted from the command center, a roar of disbelief and fury. "What is happening? Get me a diagnostic on Jericho. Now! Rostova, what's the status on comms?" Eris stood and walked to the edge of her lab, looking into the controlled chaos of the command center. Technicians scrambled over their consoles, their faces pale in the glow of dying systems. Red lights were blooming across the main board like a deadly rash. The seismic intrusion sensors, the eyes and ears in the rock, were next to go, their displays dissolving into a blizzard of static. They were blind. Lieutenant Eva Rostova, a young, ferociously intelligent signals officer, was running frantic diagnostics, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "I have nothing, sir," she called out, her voice tight with strain. "The entire array is offline. It's not a hardware failure. The system isn't responding. It's like the lines have just been cut." "That's impossible," Vance bellowed, striding to the center of the room. He was a caged animal, lashing out at an enemy he could not see. His entire methodology, his whole world, was built on systems, on protocols, on the predictable flow of information, and his systems had just evaporated. "Run the reboot sequence, full system purge, get those comms back online." "Sir, we can't," Rostova replied, her voice verging on desperate. "The reboot commands require a handshake with the primary server, and the server isn't seeing the array. There's no connection. It's a physical layer problem." "Then send a maintenance team down to the conduit," Vance ordered, his face a mask of grim determination. He was falling back on the only thing he knew: direct action, brute force. An older NCO, a chief engineer named Garrett, shook his head. "Sir, the main conduit is 3 kilometers out, at a depth of 1,000 meters. We can't send a team out there blind, not with an unknown threat active. It would be a suicide mission." Vance's fists were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. His authority, once absolute, was bleeding away with every failed command, every new red light on the board. He was a pilot in a cockpit with no controls. He ordered perimeter patrols to sweep the surface, a futile gesture against a threat that was operating thousands of feet below them. He demanded that the engineers try to bypass the main relays, an act that only caused more systems to short out in a cascade of failures. His methods, the by-the-book, traditional responses of a conventional soldier, were not just ineffective, they were actively making the situation worse. His rigid worldview had crashed against a problem it was not equipped to comprehend, and it was shattering. The command center, once a model of military efficiency, was now a chamber of rising panic and failing technology, presided over by a man shouting useless orders into a void. The air thickened with the smell of scorched electronics and fear. The base, their impenetrable fortress, had become a tomb. They were cut off, isolated, and utterly vulnerable. And in the growing chaos, as Major Vance's authority crumbled under the weight of his own inadequacy, a quiet space began to form. All eyes, one by one, began to drift from the flailing major to the still figure standing at the edge of the room. They turned toward Dr. Eris Thorne. In the heart of the paralysis, as the last of the secondary sensors flickered and died, Eris stepped forward. She moved from the periphery of the chaos into its epicenter, her calm a stark island in the sea of rising panic. She carried her data slate, its screen glowing with the one system that was still functioning perfectly, her own. The geophones were passive instruments. They could not be jammed, only overwhelmed, and she had shielded her private network from the base's central grid. She had known this was a possibility. She had planned for it. She walked directly to the main holographic display table in the center of the room, the one currently showing a useless static map. With a few swift gestures on her slate, she tethered her device to the projector. The static map vanished, replaced by her own, far more detailed geological model of the mountain. A pulsing spiderweb-like network of red energy was now overlaid on the image, its tendrils wrapped around the schematic of FAB Chimera. The 1.2 Hz signal was now a raging, complex symphony of destructive frequencies. "They are not cutting our systems," she announced, her voice cutting cleanly through the panicked murmurings. It was not loud, but it commanded absolute attention. Every person in the room, including a stunned Major Vance, turned to face her. "They are vibrating them to death." She pointed to a tendril of red energy that intersected with a blue line representing a communications conduit. "The enemy is using a series of decentralized, deep-burrowing resonance emitters. They are not attacking the base, they are attacking the mountain. They have tuned their transmissions to the resonant frequency of the crystalline structures in the rock, turning the mountain itself into a weapon. The vibrations travel through the quartz veins and are amplified, creating micro-fractures in our fiber optic cables and sympathetic vibrations that overload the delicate circuits in our sensor arrays. It's the geological equivalent of a denial-of-service attack." Major Vance stared at her, his face a canvas of confusion and rage. "Resonance emitters? What are you talking about? This is insane." Eris ignored him. Her attention was focused on Lieutenant Rostova. She saw in the young officer's eyes not fear, but a flicker of understanding. Rostova was a signals expert. She understood frequencies. She understood waves. "Lieutenant," Eris said, her tone direct and professional, a transfer of authority happening in that single word. "Your diagnostics showed a physical layer problem, because the physical layer has been shattered into uselessness. Trying to reboot the system is like trying to send a letter down a torn-up road. The road needs to be rebuilt. But we can't do that, Rostova said, her mind catching up to the implications. We can't access the conduits. We don't have to, Eris replied. We are not going to fight their signal. We are going to hijack it. Her gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of the stunned technicians and soldiers. Authority was not being seized. It was flowing to her, a natural consequence of the vacuum left by Vance's failure. She was the only one with a diagnosis. She was the only one with a plan. They are using the mountain's resonant properties against us. We will use them to create a feedback loop that will destroy their emitters. She turned to the chief engineer, Garrett. Chief, I need you to divert all non-essential power to the primary fusion core's induction regulator. I need to be able to control the power output with microsecond precision. Garrett hesitated, looking instinctively toward Major Vance. Vance stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. He was no longer in command. He was a spectator at his own deposition. Do it, Chief, Rostova said, her voice firm. She had made her choice. She was following the logic, not the rank. That was the crack in the dam. Garrett, seeing Rostova's conviction and Vance's paralysis, nodded slowly and turned to his console. Aye, Doctor. Eris then turned back to Rostova. Lieutenant, I need you to bypass the base's primary comms board and link my personal processing unit directly to the core's modulation control. I will be inputting a frequency sequence. It will be complex, and it must be transmitted without any distortion from the base's damaged systems. Bypass the main board? Rostova's eyes widened. That's a complete violation of protocol. Protocol failed, Eris stated simply. The enemy is playing a chord. We are going to play a note that shatters the instrument. And what if you're wrong? Vance finally snarled, finding his voice. What if you overload the core? You could vaporize this entire mountain. Eris looked at him, her expression a flat, clinical calm that was more terrifying than any anger. Your strategy of inaction guarantees our destruction. My calculation presents a 97.3% probability of success. She turned away from him, her dismissal absolute. Lieutenant Rostova, the enemy emitters are adapting. We have less than 10 minutes before they shift frequencies, and my model becomes obsolete. We need to move, now. Rostova looked from Vance's apoplectic face to Aris's calm certainty at the schematic of the base being slowly strangled by the red web of energy. She made the decision that would define her career. She took a deep breath. Right away, Doctor. The dam had broken. The rest of the command center staff, seeing their comrades lead, turned to their stations, their allegiance shifting in a silent, collective wave. They awaited her orders. Major Vance stood alone in the center of the room he no longer commanded, an irrelevant monument to a dead hierarchy. The command center transformed. The panicked, headless thrashing ceased, replaced by a tense, focused industry. Eris stood at the holographic table, the hub of the operation, her data slate now the nerve center for the entire base. Her voice was a calm, steady instrument, issuing a stream of precise, often counterintuitive commands. There was no emotion, no wasted motion, only the pure, cold logic of her plan. She was not a commander shouting for dominance. She was a surgeon guiding her team through a delicate and critical procedure. Chief Garrett, she began, her eyes tracing the flow of energy on her display. Bring the core output to 70%. I want the induction coils fully saturated, but hold the plasma injection. We need a stable magnetic field, not a power surge. 70% holding injection, Garrett confirmed, his fingers moving with renewed confidence over his controls. He was a man given a solvable problem, and the relief was evident in his voice. Lieutenant Rostova, Eris continued, confirm the bypass. Is my unit slaved to the modulation control? The link is established, Doctor, Rostova replied from her station. She had physically patched a fiber optic cable from Eris's personal server rack directly into the core's regulatory nexus, a feat of battlefield engineering that was both brilliant and highly illegal. I am reading your output signal. It's a clean sine wave. No, wait. She squinted at her monitor. It's a cascade of frequencies, a fractal pattern. Correct, Eris said. The enemy is using a single, powerful frequency to create resonance. We are going to introduce a counter frequency, but not to cancel theirs out. We are going to harmonize with it, just for a moment. She manipulated her slate, and on the main hologram, a new line of brilliant blue light appeared, overlaying the red web of the enemy's attack. The primary stratum they are using for amplification is a layer of gneiss shot through with conductive quartz. It has a natural resonant frequency of 1.2 Hz. They found the mountain's fundamental note. She began to type a rapid sequence of commands onto her slate. We are not going to fight them on that frequency. We are going to introduce a harmonic overtone, a perfect fifth. The concept was so abstract, so alien to the military mindset, that a wave of baffled silence passed through the room. They were used to countermeasures, jamming, and kinetic strikes. The idea of using musical theory to fight a battle was from another universe. The introduction of the harmonic will briefly cause constructive interference, Eris explained, her voice as steady as a metronome. For a fraction of a second, the amplitude of the vibrations in the rock will increase exponentially. The enemy's systems will register this as a success, a power spike. Their automated protocols will attempt to compensate by drawing more power to stabilize their signal. She paused, letting the implication sink in. And in that moment of compensation, she continued, we will invert the phase of our signal. Rostova's head snapped up. Destructive interference, she breathed, her eyes wide with dawning comprehension. You'll pull the rug out from under them. More than that, Eris corrected. A simple phase inversion would just cancel the wave. We are going to shift the phase and simultaneously flood the harmonic with the full, unregulated power of the fusion core. We will create a resonant cascade failure. The sudden, massive energy spike, coupled with the instantaneous phase cancellation, will travel back up their own signal path. The feedback will be catastrophic. It will not just disable their emitters, it will overload and physically destroy them. It was a plan of breathtaking elegance and terrifying risk. It was checkmate, delivered not with a sledgehammer, but with a stiletto. Stand by, Eris commanded. The room held its breath. Garrett, on my mark, release plasma injection, full burn. Rostova, monitor the feedback amplitude. If it exceeds the predicted threshold by more than 5%, sever the link immediately. Standing by, the two voices replied in unison. Eris placed her thumb on a single icon on her slate. The icon was labeled Turn. Her mind was a silent whirlwind of calculations, modeling the wave propagations, the energy transfer, the potential points of failure. She felt the deep, sickening thrum of the enemy's attack through the floor, a vibration that had become the rhythm of their impending doom. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, not in prayer, but in pure concentration, aligning herself with the pulse of the mountain. "Now," she said. She pressed the icon. For an instant, nothing happened. Then, a low hum began to emanate from the very walls of the base, a deep, pure tone that felt like it was originating from the center of the earth. It was the C-sharp of the harmonic she had introduced, the perfect fifth. On the holographic display, the blue line of her signal perfectly merged with the red web of the enemies. The entire network glowed with a brilliant, blinding violet. The vibration in the floor intensified dramatically. The lights flickered. A metallic groaning echoed through the superstructure of the base as the rock around them resonated with the combined power of two immense energy sources. It felt like the mountain was screaming. Several technicians cried out in alarm, their hands flying to their consoles. "Hold your stations!" Rostova shouted, her voice cutting through the fear. Her eyes were locked on Aris. "Full burn, Garrett," Aris commanded, her voice steady despite the violent shaking. "Injection released, core at 100%, Garrett yelled back over the rising cacophony. The hum rose in pitch and volume, becoming a physical force that pressed in on them, rattling their teeth. On the hologram, the violet network flared with impossible brightness. Aris's eyes were fixed on a timer on her slate, counting down the milliseconds. The constructive interference was reaching its peak. The enemy was taking the bait. 3, 2, 1. "Inverting," she said, and with another tap on her slate, she flipped the phase and unleashed the core. The result was not an explosion. It was an absence. The world-shaking hum vanished instantly, replaced by a silence so profound it was disorienting. The violent vibrations ceased, cut off as if by a switch. In the sudden, shocking quiet, the only sound was the frantic pounding of their own hearts. On the holographic display, the brilliant violet network imploded. The red tendrils of the enemy's attack did not fade. They were violently erased, retracting back from the base in a split second, as if being devoured by the void. One by one, the red source points on the map blinked out of existence, each one dying in a silent flash of light. Then another sound began to fill the room. It was a soft, melodic chime, and another, and another. Rostova stared at her board, her expression one of utter disbelief. "Green," she whispered. "Sir, doctor, I have green lights." Across the main board, the red warnings were vanishing, replaced by steady, reassuring green. The Jericho defense grid came back online. The seismic intrusion sensors reactivated, their displays showing nothing but the calm, baseline signature of stable rock. "Comms are back!" a technician shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "I have a handshake with high command. Secure channel is re-established." The threat was gone. The silence that followed was not the dead silence of a tomb, but the living silence of a world restored. It was the sound of survival. The men and women of the command center slowly looked up from their consoles, their faces etched with awe. They looked at the green board, at the clean map on the hologram, and then they looked at the quiet woman who stood at its center. They looked at Dr. Aris Thorne, and for the first time, they truly saw her. The siege was broken. In the profound silence that held the command center in its grip, a new sound emerged. It was a high-pitched, insistent beeping from the newly restored communications console. The technician at the station turned, his eyes wide. "Sir, Major Vance, it's a Priority 1 channel from Stratcom. It's It's General Madsen." The name fell into the room like a physical weight. General Thaddeus Madsen was the supreme commander of strategic deep space and terrestrial operations, a near mythical figure whose name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones. For him to be calling a forward operating base directly was unheard of. It was the equivalent of God calling the parish office. Major Vance, who had been standing as if turned to stone, was jolted back to life. This was a lifeline, a chance to reassert his authority, to report the situation and reclaim his command. He strode toward the comm station, puffing out his chest. "Put him on the main screen," he ordered, his voice raspy. The technician complied, and the holographic table flickered, the geological map replaced by the stern, weathered face of General Madsen. His expression was grim, his eyes radiating an intelligence and authority that made Vance's pale in comparison. "Report," Madsen said, his voice a low rumble that needed no amplification. "General Madsen," Vance began, trying to inject his voice with a confidence he did not feel. "This is Major Kalen Vance, commander of FOB Chimera. We have just repelled a significant, unconventional enemy attack. There was a temporary loss of systems, but I am pleased to report that my team and I am not talking to you, Major," Madsen cut him off, his voice like cracking ice. The dismissal was so swift, so total, that Vance physically recoiled as if struck. The entire room froze. General Madsen's gaze swept past Vance, searching. "I asked for a report. Where is Axiom?" The name hung in the air, alien and confusing. Vance frowned. "Axiom, sir? There is no one here by that name. You must be mistaken." "I am never mistaken, Major," Madsen said, his patience clearly evaporating. "Patch me through to the architect, now." A quiet movement broke the tension. Eris Thorne stepped forward from behind the holographic projector, her data slate held loosely at her side. She met the general's holographic eyes without a flicker of deference or surprise. She simply nodded. "Axiom here, General. The beta test was successful." Vance stared at her, then back at the screen, his mind refusing to process what was happening. "Her? General, this is Dr. Thorne. She's a civilian geologist, a contractor." Madsen's eyes narrowed to slits. He ignored Vance completely, his entire focus on Eris. "Report, Axiom. The enemy deployed a network of approximately 20 resonance emitters, as predicted," Eris stated, her voice the same calm, clinical tone she always used. "They achieved system-level incapacitation at T-0. We initiated the turn countermeasure at T+8 minutes. The feedback cascade successfully propagated through the Guinness stratum, resulting in a 100% neutralization of all hostile emitters. The base is secure. The mountain is quiet." Madsen listened, nodding slowly. "And the core?" "Stable," Eris replied. "Power fluctuations were within 0.8% of the simulation's projections. No lasting damage to the primary systems." "Excellent work," Madsen said. It was not praise. It was a simple confirmation of a successful outcome, an acknowledgement between peers. He then looked, for the first time with open contempt, at the sputtering Major Vance. "Major, you had the architect of the entire Jericho-class deep denial program on site for final calibration. A woman whose security clearance is 3 levels above my own. And you not only failed to recognize her, you actively obstructed her. You dismissed her analysis as geological fantasies. I have the full transcript of your little performance in the mess hall. You called her just a civilian." Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling Vance's career and his entire sense of self in front of his assembled command. His face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. The revelation rippled through the room. Eris Thorne, the quiet rock collector, Axiom, the architect, the woman who hadn't just saved the base, she had designed its very foundations, its most secret defenses. She wasn't an outsider. She was the source. The quiet, unassuming woman in the gray jumpsuit held more authority in her little finger than the major held in his entire decorated career. Their perception of her didn't just transform, it shattered and reassembled itself into a new, terrifying reality. They had been living with a legend and had been too blind to see it. Major Vance, General Madsen continued, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. You are a relic. You value protocol over results and ego over evidence. That mindset has no place in my command. As of this moment, you are relieved of your duties. Lieutenant Rostova will assume temporary command of FOB Chimera until your replacement arrives. You will pack your personal belongings and await transport. Your career is over. The connection cut out, leaving Madsen's final judgment echoing in the stunned silence. Vance stood for a long moment, his shoulders slumped, a man hollowed out. He looked at Eris, at the woman he had mocked and belittled, and in his eyes there was a universe of dawning, horrified comprehension. He had not just been wrong, he had been irrelevant. Without another word, he turned and walked slowly out of the command center, his footsteps no longer the confident stamp of a commander, but the shuffling gait of a ghost. The days that followed the turn were quiet. A new order settled over FOB Chimera, an order based not on the loudness of a voice or the decorations on a uniform, but on the quiet authority of competence. Lieutenant Rostova, thrust into a command she never sought, proved to be a natural leader. She was decisive, logical, and she listened. Her first official act was to formally integrate Dr. Thorne's geological monitoring system into the primary command and control suite, making Eris's data a permanent, respected fixture of the base's defense posture. The crew treated Eris with a new kind of reverence. They no longer saw a strange civilian. They saw the architect, the ghost in their machine. They gave her a wide berth, not out of fear, but out of a profound, almost primal respect. Conversations would hush when she entered a room, and the soldiers would watch her with a mixture of awe and a little bit of healthy terror. She showed no pleasure in her vindication, no triumph in Vance's fall. Her victory had not been over him. It had been over a problem. With the problem solved, she simply returned to her work, her focus once again narrowed to the deep, slow pulse of the earth. She spent her time refining the models, charting the new silence in the rock where the enemy emitters had been. The mountain was truly quiet now, its artificial heartbeat gone, its natural rhythms returning. She cataloged the subtle shifts in stress and strain, the geological echoes of the violent energy cascade she had unleashed. For her, the event was not just a victory. It was a unique data set, a chance to study the weaponization of geology on an unprecedented scale. One morning, as she was calibrating a new set of geophones, a figure appeared at the entrance to her lab. It was Lieutenant Rostova. She held 2 steaming mugs in her hands. She did not enter with the bluster of Vance or the timid deference of the other soldiers. She approached quietly, with the calm respect of a professional addressing a peer. "Doctor," Rostova said, holding out one of the mugs, "I thought you might want some coffee." Eris looked up, her fingers pausing over her console. She took the mug, the warmth seeping into her hands. "Thank you, Lieutenant." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the low hum of the servers. Rostova did not offer praise or gushing gratitude. She knew Eris would have no use for it. Instead, she gestured with her chin toward the main screen, where a complex equation for wave propagation was displayed. "I was reviewing the logs from the turn," Rostova said. "The fractal pattern you used for the harmonic overtone, it wasn't just a perfect fifth. There were micro-variations, subharmonics. I couldn't make sense of them. They didn't seem to fit the standard model for constructive interference." Eris took a slow sip of her coffee. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her mouth. It was the first time anyone on the base had seen her do so. "The subharmonics were not for the interference, Lieutenant. They were for the feedback." Rostova frowned in concentration. "I don't understand." "The enemy emitters were networked," Eris explained. "Destroying one would have triggered a failsafe in the others, causing them to shift frequency. The feedback from the first emitter had to carry a signal to the rest of the network, a signal that would lock them into receiving mode and prevent them from adapting. The subharmonics were a key, encoded into the feedback wave itself. It told the other emitters to open the door right before the battering ram hit." Rostova stared at her, her mind reeling at the layers of complexity, the sheer intellectual brilliance of the solution. It wasn't just a checkmate. It was a checkmate planned 10 moves in advance, on a board no one else even knew existed. This was the quiet acknowledgement, the true sign of the new order. It was not a salute or a medal, but a shared cup of coffee and a technical question, an exchange between two minds operating on a higher plane than the rest of the base. It was the only kind of respect Eris Thorne understood or desired. 3 days later, a long-range transport shuttle descended from the bruised twilight sky, its engines a quiet hum against the vast silence of the Argus Range. It settled onto the landing pad carved into the mountain's flank, its arrival as discreet as its passengers had been. Eris stood at the mouth of the hangar bay, a single small bag at her feet. She wore the same simple gray jumpsuit. She was leaving as she had arrived, a ghost slipping back into the ether. Lieutenant Rostova stood with her, the silence between them comfortable. "Your work here is foundational, Doctor," Rostova said, choosing her word with care. "It won't be forgotten." "It's just data now, Lieutenant," Eris replied. "Use it well." She turned and walked toward the shuttle's ramp. As she passed the security checkpoint at the edge of the hangar, the young gate guard, a soldier who had once watched with amusement as Major Vance berated her, snapped to attention. He did not salute Lieutenant Rostova, his acting commander. His eyes were fixed on Eris, with a sharp, precise motion that was filled with a reverence bordering on worship. He rendered a perfect salute to the unassuming woman in gray. Eris did not acknowledge it. She simply walked up the ramp and disappeared into the ship's interior. The gate guard held his salute until the ramp had closed, a silent, final testament to the new hierarchy, an order built on the undeniable truth of competence. The shuttle lifted off, a whisper of power ascending into the darkening sky, leaving behind a mountain that was once again just a mountain, and a legend that would be told in hushed tones for years. They would speak of the quiet civilian who listened to the rocks, the woman who had been dismissed and mocked by a man of great authority. They would tell the story of how that authority had shattered against the immutable fact of her brilliance, and how, in the darkest moment, she had saved them all. Eris Thorn, or Axiom, or whatever name she carried, was gone. But her lesson remained, etched into the memory of the base as deeply as the faults in the ancient stone. It was a simple, brutal lesson, that in the final accounting, true power is not the rank you wear or the volume of your voice. It is the quiet, undeniable force of knowing what to do when no one else does. And it is a force that, sooner or later, will be obeyed.